Recently, every time I happen to be watching a MapleStory stream on Twitch, there is always at least one viewer in the chat who asks about familiars. Specifically, they want to know if it's better for them to stay in Limina to farm familiars, or rush levels in the Grandis maps. Like most things in MapleStory, there is no right answers, and when it comes to familiars, there is a lot of nuance. To develop the right strategy, you have to analyze your situation and determine what goals you have in the game. However, you might not even know what questions to ask yourself or what pieces of information to consider when you're trying to make your next step. So, in today's video, Lata Binch is going to help you develop the perfect plan for you to determine if you should stay in the Arcane River for familiars or move to the new Grandis maps for grinding EXP. Familiars create a difficult situation for MapleStory players in Reboot because if you want to have the best familiars, you have to sacrifice a good chunk of EXP. This is because the mobs in the Arcane River that drop familiars have way less EXP compared to the mobs in Grandis. For instance, in Limina, End of the World 2.5, everyone's favorite map, as we know, the Embryon mobs there have about 1.6 million EXP each. The Fire Spirits mobs in Grandis, on the other hand, give you about 4 million EXP. That is a percentage change of about 150%. Plus, the maps in Grandis compared to Limina have way more mobs in them. 2.5 is a map with 33 spawn, while Fire Spirits 3, the map that I trained in, is a 38 mob spawn map. In a 33 mob spawn map, you're looking about 15k kills per hour, while a 38 mob spawn map can get you 18k per hour. So, not only does the mob have way more EXP in the Grandis area, but your hourly kill rate will be considerably higher if you choose to farm in a large Grandis map. In the Reboot server, leveling up is very important if you want to experience bossing content because of the way the final damage formula works. For example, in order to deal decent damage to Black Mage, a boss that a lot of players are striving to clear, you need to be at least level 270, otherwise you are putting yourself at a huge disadvantage because of the way the final damage penalty works. If you are too underleveled in comparison to the boss, your damage is going to plummet. So, that introduces us to our first question that you need to ask yourself as a player who is in this familiar dilemma. How soon do you want to clear Black Mage? In MapleStory, I'd argue that Black Mage is the central boss in the current state of the game. Clearing the boss introduces you to the 8-month-long liberation quests, which, after completing them, gives you the Genesis weapon, or as we call it in the community, the Jenny weapon. It's not your typical weapon though. The Jenny weapon comes pre-Starforced at 22 stars, it gives you a passive final damage buff, and it also gives you an awesome iframe that lasts 10 seconds. Upgrading from a 17-star arcane weapon to a liberated Genesis weapon is one of the biggest final damage buffs you will ever receive in MapleStory. However, since it takes 8 months to get this weapon, you ideally want to start clearing Black Mage as soon as possible. So, if your goal is to liberate your main character, does that mean you should start grinding for levels in Grandis? Well, again, it depends. Just because you need to be level 275 in order to deal adequate damage to Black Mage doesn't necessarily mean that you need to reach that level in order to liberate. If you have connections in the game who are willing to carry you through the boss, all you need to do is be at least level 255 to enter. After getting your monthly Black Mage clears, the only thing you need to worry about is being strong enough for each of the liberation quests up to Varishilla, all of which you can successfully clear at level 255. So, side note, I am completely aware that we're getting a really game-changing update in about 6 months that KMS recently got in their Reboot server, and it has to do with boss carries. So we're just talking about the current state of the game in this video. We're not getting that update for another 6 months, and so for the next 6 months, if you're able to get carried Black Mage without needing to level up, then by all means, you don't need to level up at the moment. It's not that important. But let's continue on with the discussion for the video. If you are not so fortunate to have friends or guildmates who are able and willing to carry you through Black Mage, then most likely you are looking for a party where you can help contribute damage. In that case, I would totally recommend focusing on leveling your character to at least level 270 so that you can start practicing the boss and potentially clearing. As long as you are at an adequate level, have decently Starforce gear, and are willing to put the practice in, you will have the necessary damage to clear Black Mage even if you have no familiars at all. Familiars aren't a necessity when it comes to dealing damage in Black Mage. Look at GMS, they have no familiar system at all and they are able to clear all content up to Kalos. Although familiars can be a huge boost to your damage, the damage you gain from leveling up is a guaranteed final damage gain, whereas the damage you gain from familiars is based on RNG and it doesn't even amount to the amount of final damage that you're getting from levels alone. So if you are in this pickle of needing to get to Black Mage but you're worried about your damage, just focus on the levels versus familiar farming. I guarantee that it'll be worth your while. Although leveling up is important for your damage in Black Mage, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to rush levels by training in the Grandis areas. Even though the EXP you gain in the Arcane River areas such as Moonbridge, Labyrinth of Suffering, and Limina is considerably less than the Grandis maps, that doesn't mean that you aren't receiving any EXP at all. So, the next question I would ask yourself if you are in the familiar dilemma is, how many hours can you dedicate to farming per day? For someone who only has time to farm one WAP every day or two, I would say that they should focus on grinding in Grandis. Even if you take the game very casually, leveling up in the Grandis areas is so fast that you can grind peacefully at your own pace but still make it to clearing Black Mage in a decent amount of time. The familiars aren't worth the time if you don't play too much. The extra levels on Black Mage, on the other hand, would be way more beneficial for the amount of time you have to play. However, if you're the type of player that has time for 2, 3, or maybe even more wealth potions per day, I think that it is worth it for you to continue to grind in Limina. Doing long hour sessions in Limina is very lazy and you make a good amount of mesos, nodestones, droplets, and familiars while you grind there. If you have a lot of time to dedicate to this game, I think grinding in Limina up to level 275 is very worth it because of all the resources you gain along the way, especially if this is your first character that you're ever getting to 275 on your account. These resources can not only be used on your main character, but they can also be used to fund second mains and boss meals, which are very valuable towards your account progression. If you're playing that many hours in a day, you'll eventually have the levels to clear Black Mage even if all the EXP is coming from Limina. When I was first playing this game, we didn't have the Grandis areas to train in. If you wanted to get to Black Mage, all you could do was farm in Limina for EXP. Granted, we had spawn enhancers such as Kishin and Wild Totems which made the grind in Limina way more bearable, but the grind was still very slow in comparison to the potential EXP gain nowadays. My first character that I got to 275 on this account was my Kana, Binch Cookies, which I leveled in 2.5 and 1.6 the majority of the way. When I decided to start leveling a Shadower, I wanted a different progression style, especially since I was challenging myself with the no totem grind at the time. With my Shadower, I started grinding in Cernium right away when I hit level 260 and reached the necessary sacred power. I quickly got to level 265, started training in Burning Cernium, and eventually I hit level 275 in no time. So I have both experiences when it comes to leveling. I've done my time and put the hours in Limina, but I've also seen what it's like to speed level a character using the new Grandis areas. After analyzing the two playstyles, I can see the pros and cons to grinding in both areas. If you grind in Limina, you make a lot of resources that are very beneficial to your account. However, grinding in Grandis is very time efficient and you make one of the most valuable resources in the game, levels and EXP. While you're at it, you're also getting decent amount of mesos if you're wearing your meso gear, which I highly recommend that you do if you're going to be training in any area. Looking back at it, I wish I'd spend more time in Limina on my Shadower for the familiars, but in the end of it all, I'm glad I rushed the levels. I can always go back to Limina on another character such as my Night Lord to grind familiars, which I have been doing recently on my Twitch streams. Now that I've given you a bit more perspective on how valuable levels are for Black Mage, hopefully you have a bit more clarity when it comes to the familiar dilemma. However, I also want to end this video with 2 more quick questions to ask yourself before you make the decision to skip Limina and go to Grandis for EXP. The first question is, do you already have a large item drop rate familiar and a set of healing familiars that you are comfortable with? I think skipping the familiar system entirely once you reach level 260 is a very valid play and one that I encourage for a lot of players. However, the one familiar that I would not skip out on while you're grinding is the large item drop rate familiar. I'd argue that this is the most important and powerful familiar in the game because it increases your drop rate by 100%. Not only does it give you more drop rate when you farm, netting you more familiars, nodestones, and droplets, but it also increases your chances at the pitch boss set. So please do not skip out on familiars until you have the large item drop rate familiar. While you're in search of this familiar, you might hit some boss, IED, or healing familiars along the way. Healing familiars are another one of those things that are valuable that I wouldn't skip out on, but you don't need to perfect your set of healing familiars. As long as you have one healing familiar, I would say that you're okay to get training in Grandis. When I do my bosses on both my Shadower and my Kana, I just run one healing familiar when I'm doing Will and Varishilla. Having more healing familiar lines will help you in the runs, but it's not a necessity. Just dodge and learn the mechanics of the boss a little better if you don't have the best set of healing familiars. The challenge itself is worth it to get you practicing the boss mechanics a little bit better. But at the end of the day, you're most likely gonna get a very nice set of healing familiars before you even see large item drop rate or any boss damage familiars, especially if you're gonna be opening unique familiars, which I highly recommend that you do. The last question that you need to ask yourself if you are in this familiar dilemma is, how competitive do you want to be in the game? MapleStory isn't a competitive game per se. The game generally does not reward players for being better than another player. Obviously, we have things such as Dojo, GPQ, and other small game systems that reward competitive play, but for most of the content in the game, it is a solo game in which you are competing with yourself. There are players out there who create competition in the game for themselves, such as trying to be the player with the highest stat, the strongest player in a specific class branch, etc, etc. So, if one of your goals in the game is to be the strongest player in the server or within your class branch, familiars are something that you cannot avoid. To be the strongest, you need a really nice set of boss damage familiars. If this is one of your goals, then you need to get on that familiar grind on your main character ASAP. Competitive play requires you to be in the game for the long haul, so you just have to suck it up and farm those donuts. I hope this video was helpful and insightful for all you MapleStory farmers out there. With this information, I'm sure that you have more clarity on what you want to do going forward with your progression. Just know that no matter what choice you make, all progress is progress. Go with what you feel in the moment. If you get the urge to farm familiars one day and train in Grandis on another day, do it. You can always mix it up with the maps that you farm in. You don't have to be stuck in one place forever. That's very philosophical. That applies to life too. You can even make secondary characters to farm familiars like I'm doing on my Nightlord. You can check out my Nightlord progression on twitch.tv and leave questions in the comment section if you still need clarity on some things. See you in the next video. Lata Binch.